The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, my name is Scott Brown, and I'm sitting here with James Shryock. We're here to present Workforce Management. This is part of our implementation series. Today we're talking about SaaS implementations, top 10 considerations. I wanted to start off with a couple of introductions. I'll tell you a little bit about ourselves. My name is Scott Brown. I'm president of Sability. We help companies with their workforce management strategies. Some of the areas we assist with are helping companies formulate their long-term employee work management strategies, select software to support those strategies, and we assist companies with implementing the software as well, which is what we're talking about today. We also do enterprise systems, selecting, upgrading, and tuning on-premises solutions. I'm sitting here with James Shryock. James is a 17-year veteran of human resources and workforce management systems. He's a master's in labor law from Michigan State University, and James has the background and expertise to help clients understand this rapidly changing workforce management market. Having managed dozens of mid-market SaaS implementations from several different software vendors, James is one of the industry's leading strategists when it comes to SaaS implementation and delivery. So I think at this point we're going to jump right into the presentation, and feel free to ask questions at the end. Again, James has been at this a long time as I have, so we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. So what is SaaS? This is a rather complex-looking slide. It actually came from another presentation that we did where we break down all of the different operational models, all the infrastructure models for the different workforce management delivery mechanisms. And today we're going to be focusing kind of in that little blue box that's labeled SaaS. So what is SaaS? SaaS stands for Software as a Service, and unlike a lot of the buzzwords that we use today, I think software as a service does describe exactly what what this implementation, this infrastructure model does. It literally is using software as a service, so you don't really have any of the considerations you would normally have with computer systems. Some of the characteristics of SaaS are it's off-premises, so it's run outside of your corporate walls, typically hosted or managed by the software vendor. Typically it has only one code base, and what that really translates to functionally is there are no customizations, and we'll talk a bit about this later. There are a few controversies surrounding some of the architectural deployments of SaaS. But what we advise clients is typically don't get too caught up in this. I think there are a lot of analysts who look very, very closely at exactly how SaaS is deployed, how the software vendors are deployed within their data center. A lot of this revolves around multi-tenancy. Some run different code bases that are synced up, how they deploy their app servers and databases. Typically for functional people and HR people, for us, that's a little bit too much depth. I think the bottom line question is, how well does the software function for you? We'll be talking a little bit about some of the advantages and disadvantages through there, so we thought we'd give you just a little bit of orientation up front. What we're seeing out of software as a service, especially in terms of workforce management, some of the advantages we see are minimal infrastructure. You don't have to worry about deploying computers, acquiring hardware, capital expenditures for that kind of thing. The infrastructure is all located off your premises and off your bucks. Also, there are little or no IT resources required. You don't need systems programmers. You don't need people to do installs and upgrades. You don't have to worry about database versions and platforms, backups, tuning databases. Upgrades are almost a non-issue. This is a big one, and we'll talk a little bit more again about upgrades and impacts on the more traditional delivery mechanisms for software. Your vendor is going to have a lot of hosting experience. He's going to be very good at this. Necessity dictates that they run their systems well, or they won't have customers for very long. software as a service is hugely scalable. It's virtually unlimited with a capital V on virtual. These systems are deployed in fairly large data centers, and again, there's pretty much capacity on demand as you need them. One of the nice things is it's a pay-as-you-go model. Related to the next bullet item, there's no large capital expenditure. Typically in enterprise or on-premises deployments, one of the first things you do is you have to visit your CapEx budget to acquire hardware, software. Might even have to hire some systems people to get it in and installed. That is not the case with software as a service. Typically, it's not a large implementation cost. Again, compared to some of the enterprise models where the implementations could cost 2 to 3 times what you pay for software, they're much more in line and typically below what you would normally pay for a license. One of the nice advantages is, because of the upgrade cycle, is regulatory changes are quickly reflected in the software. Again, kind of relating back to the enterprise model, the on-premises model, you might not do an upgrade for 2 years. You might have a few service packs to fix some compliance issues, but again, all those issues kind of go away. The software is upgraded by the vendor and it's immediately delivered to you as soon as you log in. Like all things, not everything is positive. There are some disadvantages to SaaS. You don't have any direct data access. Because these systems run within the corporate walls or the walls of the hosting center, you will not have direct data access. There are no customizations. You have to implement the system by configuration only. Again, we'll talk at great length about that later. You might see a slower turnaround for any kind of systems request. Again, these are operating outside your corporate walls, so you have to have, I guess, another party involved to make any kind of changes. And you also have no control over upgrade timing. Typically, the upgrades tend to be much smaller in scope and much more frequent, but those are pushed out to you, and you really don't have a lot of control about when those hit. Here, these are some of the determining factors. Should you be considering software as a service? Under the yes column, does your organization have a culture of innovation and business-driven decisions? Or are you more entrenched in always doing things the same way? Typically, software as a service does work a little bit better for somewhat more culturally forward-thinking companies who are willing to change their processes to meet demands. Are you in a period of high growth? Typically, there are huge advantages for software as a service because of the virtually unlimited on-tap capacity of those systems to grow as your business grows. You probably need to be willing to redefine some of your business processes to fit the software as opposed to molding the software to fit your business processes. I think that has, in some ways, customizations and clients' insistence that the software be wrapped around their business processes has been somewhat the Achilles heel of enterprise deployments and on-premises deployments. People tend to over-customize, and that, again, we'll talk a bit about that later, but that has huge implications when you go to upgrade. Do you have a dispersed or a remote workforce? That's essential for SaaS. Basically, the SaaS systems are available wherever the internet is available, so that becomes very easy. What are the things that may prohibit you from deploying SaaS? What kind of factors do you have that may make it very difficult for you to implement SaaS? Special integration requirements. Again, this is a little bit rare, and it was very difficult to come up with a case. But again, there may be some systems out there where you need some real-time web-based interfaces that integrate and automate the integration of systems real-time that might make it very difficult in the SaaS world since those systems are run off-premises. Some very unique security requirements I have here in parentheses. I don't think the CIA is going to be moving to a SaaS model very soon. They probably are very interested in terms of keeping their their HR, payroll, workforce management data within house. If you have a need for a high degree of customizations, you see something like this, perhaps in highly unionized environments, that might indicate that SaaS might not be a good fit for you. It seems like the very largest of enterprises with their transaction volumes and their needs don't fit as well in the SaaS world, although we do see the bar moving up in terms of size of organizations. Typically when SaaS was introduced, it was very much a mid-market offering, but we're starting to see some enterprises looking very seriously at the SaaS model. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the characteristics of on-premises. This is probably what most of you guys are familiar with. On-premises applications run in your company's data center, so they're within your corporate walls. The company, you guys, manage the complete stack. We're talking hardware, system software, operating systems, web application servers, database servers, and also you need to manage the application software. And again, it's just not that these are hardware components. You have to have the skill sets that are able to maintain these systems. And typically, again, we see this in very large enterprises, mid-market, and I guess smaller companies are hard-pressed to maintain the expertise needed to run these systems effectively. So what are the advantages of on-premises? You do have pretty much unlimited flexibility. You can customize it however you want to. You have absolute control over things such as systems response time, database access. Again, these are running within your own domain, so you're able to do whatever technically you are able to accomplish. You have a lot of interface flexibility. You can interface at the database level, the web services level, or pretty much at any layer at which there is an interface. You have direct database access. And again, this is one thing, one issue that really does, probably one of the larger, more controversial issues is how can you run without actually getting to your database? Well, we have seen it happen, and it is possible, but there are some considerations wrapped around that. The disadvantages of on-premises. Scalability is limited by your hardware. So if you're in a high-growth mode, the last thing you probably want to do is have to go out and acquire new hardware, with all the considerations that go around that. Not only capital expenditures, but it's just a huge project to rip and replace your hardware. Deep expertise is required. Even some of the largest companies struggle with running their workforce management systems effectively and maintaining good response time and keeping their databases clean, things like that. There is a tendency to over-customize. If you can do it, it's very easy to say yes, and you really do pay the price when it comes to upgrade. A lot of what we're seeing in the enterprise market, over the past 15 years, is companies growing much more intolerant in terms of cost associated with upgrades. Many times it's as expensive as the original implementation was. So why would you want to go on premises? Again, if you're a very large enterprise. If you have some corporate restrictions for the distribution of data, a lot of financial companies may have policies which restrict data access and data usage outside their organization, although once again we're seeing this increasingly rare as an issue. If you have predictable or moderate growth, if you're on a steady stream, you feel like you have hardware capacity, on-premises may be okay for you. If you have very complex functional requirements, if you have multiple unions with extremely difficult payroll calculations and things like that, on-premises may be for you because they may require some customizations for you to be able to support your workforce. What would knock you out of being on-premises? Likelihood of acquisition. It's much easier for you to be acquired if your systems are running elsewhere. If you have limited technical resources, this is a big one. This is something that companies, again, some of the largest of enterprise companies struggle with keeping the adequate technical resources and their systems humming along. If you're a distributed organization, SaaS is very attractive because you really don't have to build that infrastructure to deliver your applications out to remote offices. That's just a given. Limited capital, again, huge hardware acquisition and I guess labor to get these systems up, installed, strictly from a hardware aspect. And implementations are very expensive. Again, sometimes running 2 to 3 times the license cost of software. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to James, who's going to talk through some of his experiences with his top 10 here.
Hey everyone. We're going to start with slide number 1, and this is titled, Am I Ready? So the first thing we need to think about is, do we need a new system? Are we having current system issues? Is there missing functionality from our current system? You know, whether these even exist or not, your company has spent a lot of time and money to put in the current system that you have. So if you just rolled something out 2 years ago, sometimes it's pretty difficult to be able to transform into a new system, whether it's SaaS on-premise or any of the above. You know, the second question is, you know, do we have the budget to do so? While we found that SaaS implementations are easier and tend to be more inexpensive than other implementations, the fact is they still cost money, so you still need to go through the process of getting everything approved. Is your company ready? SaaS or no SaaS, these projects take time. You have to think about what other things are going on in your organization. You probably don't want to roll these out at the same time. Maybe you're doing a new CRM, or maybe you're doing a new financial system. You need to look through your organization and say, you know, are we really ready? Do we have the right people? Do we just go through a lot of layoffs that, you know, make it difficult for us to just be able to get by with what we're doing? Another thing to think about is if your company is going to support a SaaS model. Now, Scott referenced this before. Having your data sit somewhere else more than likely is going to make a couple people in your organization very nervous. They're just not used to that method, and it's, you know, different than what they've done before, and it's understandable. Another thing that we've seen with the SaaS model is people often wonder what is going to happen with our IT group. You know, thinking about it, you don't need as many people to support a SaaS model, and while that sounds great, you know, there are jobs involved here, and there are things to think about through there. And you know, I think, you know, that's scary stuff for IT groups. It's uncharted territory. Now, the traditional answer here is we talk about it's great these resources can be utilized to do much more strategic things, but when it all comes down to it, you know, companies are looking to, you know, trim their budget. So it's just things you really want to keep in mind. Slide number 2 is how long will this take? Well, obviously, the short answer is it depends. There's a lot of variables, you know, how complex your implementation is going to be, you know, how ready you are to do these sorts of things. I will say that what we've seen is that SaaS implementations are typically much shorter than hosted implementations. You know, it's there's a couple reasons why we're seeing this. The no customizations is a big deal. And you know, a lot of you have done these projects throughout the year. You know that every company has some sort of strange requirement, and it's something that, you know, they feel is 100% a business driver and must have. When you go through it a little deeper, sometimes you find that the reason why it's a must have is because it's been done that way. And so you kind of need to move away from that line of thinking when you're going to the SaaS world, because in a true SaaS environment there are no customizations. Another reason why we see that things tend to take shorter periods of time is the environment issues. When you don't have to set up the app server, the middleware, the database, I mean, how many times have we gone through implementations where we're down for 4 days because something was happening in the middleware on this new software we're putting in where, you know, everything's not talking to each other. And, you know, you call in the vendor, and oftentimes it's not the vendor you're doing the implementation with, and it was just one setting that needed to be changed, but you lose a lot of days. And you've got this nice project plan, and everything's got to get pushed back a week. You know, these implementations tend to be a lot more virtual. It's virtual all the way around. It's a lot less on-premise for the people who are setting this up as well. And what we found is this also tends to be a lot faster. Now I'm going to get into this a little bit later in one of my other slides, but we've definitely seen that this is definitely cut down on the timelines. Another thing is that we found that these implementations, they have a lot less variables, and it's kind of a I don't want to call it a cookie cutter approach, but when you go and you implement a SaaS system, I like to think of it kind of as opening a franchise versus a restaurant all on your own. A franchise is always going to be easier to implement. It doesn't matter who you hire to come in and help you build this restaurant you want to do. When someone's already built a framework and drops it in and it's pretty much turnkey, really the kinks have already been worked out of the system. So it's a lot different feel. Now, that can be a little different if you're the early adopter of a SaaS system. Of course, there's some advantages to being the early adopter, especially if you do have things that we call customizations. It sure seems a lot easier to get them into an early adopter SaaS product than somewhere way down the line.
Yeah, that is a good point, James, and something that I probably missed. There is an opportunity, if you have an unusual requirement, it's very possible that another client might have that as well. And SaaS vendors, from my experience, have been fairly open. They want to hear from other customers. What do you need to make this this easier?
Slide number 3 is going to talk about internal resources. So the first one, resource requirements. Well, we found that it takes a different skill set to roll out a SaaS project than maybe the traditional implementations. The traditional teams that we see, you've got project management, you've got functional consultants, you've got technical consultants, and you've got an infrastructure team that can go ahead and do all of the hardware things. With a SaaS team, we find that the two key roles on the client side is first, project manager, and second, SME, subject matter experts. As far as application knowledge in the SaaS world, clients tend to probably understand the product a little bit less because they don't need to implement it as much. So, when you have an implementation that's scheduled to last for a year and you've got resources on site sitting with your internal team, they're able to shadow them. They're able to learn all the different things about the system, and that probably makes you pretty ready when you actually get into rolling out the system. So even though you don't need to learn the product sometimes as much because someone's away somewhere else implementing it, this can actually be a bad thing. You really need to make sure that your internal resources go to lots of training on these SaaS products and get themselves involved. A lot of times as clients you need to contact the vendor and explain to them that, hey, I'd like to be involved in this configuration or that configuration, because it's going to allow your team to get a lot stronger. One thing that hasn't changed is that obviously interfaces are still needed. SaaS systems often keep it simple for internal requirements, for interface requirements, but the output has simplicity as well. It's usually driven by some sort of scheduler screen using configurations, and it often is technologies that you're used to, like XML. So if you have very complex interface requirements where you need certain headers and trailers that use some bits of logic, I found that can be a lot more difficult in the SaaS world to get those configured, as really it's all done inside the system through configuration. The next bullet I have here is vendor versus third party, and there's really no right or wrong answers here. You should expect and demand high quality work whether you're getting implementations done by a vendor or a third party consulting firm. Often third parties can help match you up with the correct system, and it's easier to let them do the implementation or work with the vendor since they've already documented all of your needs. In the cases where you've already selected a vendor, they often have a group that was going to do this implementation for you, and that's good as well. One thing to make sure, if you use a partner for implementations, you want to make sure that they're a certified partner of the vendor. It's always good to ask the vendor who they recommend, If you've got good relationships with the vendor, you really want to lean on them to make sure that the people doing your implementations are top-notch. I think it's important to recognize that there are lots of options. You don't want to go out there and see the first SaaS system out there and think, wow, this is so much better than what we already have. Well, there's probably 4 other systems that are better than what you have too, and it's easy to fall in love with the first one you see. Going through a vendor selection is very important. There's sometimes subtle differences between the different vendors, and you really want to get some expertise about whose vendor product matches up with our own corporate culture needs. The next slide is, can we do this without help? Well, I mean, the first question is, how much time do you have? It's rolling out a system. If you're not an expert in that different product, you really need to go out and get lots of training and kind of embed yourself with the product to make sure that you truly understand it. Is that really worth it? These implementations are very fast, and we see SaaS products go in 2 to 3 months for full implementations, and that's not even with people working full-time on it. So even though they don't take very much time, the people working on them require a lot of knowledge, both on the product and inside your company. The third question I have here is, will the vendor let you? And a good bit of the time, the answer here is no. And it's for some of the same reasons. These people are trained on how to configure this, and it often takes them more time to support someone else going through and doing that. There are some vendors who let you get heavily involved, and there are other vendors who, pretty much said, please shadow along, but we're going to do the work here, and the lion's share of that is going to be done by us. And then the fourth bullet we have here is expertise. The good vendors have these implementations down like a well-oiled machine. So our advice is usually, kind of in the middle. You really want to let either the implementation partner or the vendor be in charge of the implementations, but you want to shadow them as much as you can. And I want to reemphasize here that this is sometimes where you need to press back on the vendors. It's easier for them just to roll it out and hand you the keys and say, enjoy. But you want to press to make sure they understand that you want to be involved in the implementation so that you have a lot of knowledge transfer. The other thing is, in this SaaS model, is a lot of times the prices you get quoted are going to be fixed fee. And so with the fixed fee model, they want to get this done as fast as possible. So unless you have hours built in for some of this knowledge transfer, it's sometimes going to be difficult to get the vendor's attention. However, we repeat again, you are the client. You have rights when it comes to all these things, and so you really need to communicate very clearly what you're looking to do and also be reasonable of your expectations. So slide number 5 talks about on-site versus off-site resources. We all know the traditional model. You get a team of 5 people that show up on your doorstep on a Monday morning, and they're ready to be there for the next couple months. There's little or no remote access. An off-site model is obviously a little bit different. Certainly there are times where people are on-premise, but mostly it deals, with how well you can communicate. It's all remote access. But in today's world, we've got WebEx, conference calls, GoToMeetings. You can share your screen through instant messaging programs. There are several ways where someone can take over your computer and show you different things. Really, we feel that if you're a company that requires people to be on-site all the time, you're really now in the minority. It's just not efficient. Especially if it's time and materials, when you have someone show up on your site for Monday through Thursday from 8 to 5, they're going to be billing you for 32 hours of work there. In reality, we find in the SaaS world that people are often waiting on different things. So there's configuration to be done, and then there's several questions that the consultants will ask out to the vendor. and then it takes time to get those answers back. You really don't want someone sitting on site, wasting your money, waiting for the next thing to come in, working on other things. It's just not practical during all phases of the project.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, and you were kind of alluding to it, but most of the implementations we're doing these days, especially the mid-market, our consultants are running 2 to 4 implementations simultaneously, and a couple of reasons. For the reasons that James mentioned, as well as you guys typically have payrolls to run and things like that. So it helps to interleave because you probably may not have the capacity to be a dedicated resource to the implementation all the time. So interleaving 2 to 4 projects gives you the breaks to do your job while the implementation goes on.
Now there are times where it does make sense to have people on site, and from our experience, some of those times are during discovery, and that's especially if you feel like your requirements are very complex. Sometimes there's nothing better than getting into a conference room and getting in front of a whiteboard and drawing it out, and that's the easiest way to understand. We've seen that some clients request it during parallel testing. While you've gone through system testing and configuration, we've seen a lot of issues. It's nice to have someone on site. And then finally, some clients like consultants there during the go live, and that's especially if it's a high profile rollout for any reason, or if testing didn't go that well. You want someone to be able to immediately respond to anything you had. So when you do want people on site, those are the times where we tend to see that it makes the most sense. We talked about interfacing a little bit earlier. In the workforce management world, we're all very familiar with the 2 main interfaces, and that's HR and payroll. So, just like you expect, all of the SaaS systems have these standard interfaces between these systems. Often these interfaces are already built, even if the systems aren't related at all. So if you're using X as a WFM system and you're using Y as a payroll system, and they really have nothing to do with each other, chances are some other client has already done that, and they often work to reuse those interfaces between the system. One of the exciting things that we're seeing is we're starting to see systems that can do it all. We see it advertised all the time. You'll see companies put out there that they are able to do everything in your system, from CRM to financials to HR payroll to onboarding, recruiting, down to your WFM. What we're really seeing most of the times in that is that they're making acquisitions inside different companies that allow them to claim they have a full suite of products and that they're fully integrated, but they really aren't. When you hear companies say that, you really need to ask, what are the different integration points between your own internal software? If you need to send a payroll export file to another system, even if that system is part of the same family, it's not truly integrated. And it's the same with HR files. But we are seeing that some truly integrated systems are being built, and like I said, it's really exciting from the WFM perspective. And lining up with payroll, we've seen things that are going zero to net, all using same table structures, same fields, same terminologies. When you have those different things, that's truly an integrated system. And like I said, we're seeing that, and it's very exciting. Some of the other systems you might see, cost systems. I put down here single sign-on. Keep in mind integrating internal systems with SaaS systems can, sometimes present their own set of challenges, like SSO. So, if you're not hosting it and it's somewhere else, there's a couple more considerations to think about and work through. Usually we've seen that these SaaS vendors have, come up with solutions for these, and that they're pretty easy to roll out. Uptime. So the first thing I have here is uptime measurements. You always want to ask the vendor for statistics on their upside. Often you'll hear people talk about the 9s. And this is when dealing with what's called a high availability model. Say, for example, if the uptime is 3 nines, which means it's up 99.9% of the time, that means that it's not going to be down for more than 8.76 hours a year, 43.2 minutes a month, and 10.1 minutes a week. So this isn't a technical discussion, I know, that we're doing here on the presentation, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure that you see the statistics from the vendor on their uptime.
Yeah, and the 3 nines that James just quoted seems to be kind of the standard that the application vendors are centering on. And again, 10 minutes per week is fairly tolerable for most people, but know those 10 minutes will probably come at the most inconvenient time, and 2 minutes is an average. So again, I think James is going to jump into some of my experience here.
Yeah, as a general statement, I'll just say that we see less downtime with SaaS than with other models. You've got multiple clients working on the same environments, and anytime there is downtime, it becomes exponentially bad. And the vendor is generally going to use every resource they have to get that back up. Their reputation's on the line, and they want to sell more clients. And in order to sell more clients, they need to statistically show what their uptime is. I can't emphasize enough that they take downtime very, very seriously. So I would say overall, if you've got a traditional IT department, I'm sure they work very hard to make sure you're down. But when it's down, you've only got a small team of people to try to figure out the solution.
Yeah, and another point that I'm not sure where this fits in, but this seems as good a time as any, is understand that vendors are I guess, we see vendors as much more being on the hook for better customer service with a SaaS model. And here's the primary reason. The barriers to switching are much lower with SaaS. For an enterprise product with a hardware, with a license cost, and with the implementation costs that go 2 to 3 times what the license cost was, you are not going to switch, no matter how terrible your vendor was. That's an unfortunate fact. That is absolutely reversed with SaaS. Because you have no hardware investment, because the implementation, although all implementations do carry a certain amount of pain with them, the implementations for SaaS, and I hate to use the word easy and implementation in the same sentence, but they are much, much easier by orders of magnitude than they were with the enterprise.
The next slide I have is customizations. What? No customizations? Well, as a general statement, no. In a true SaaS model, there is no customizations. The question is, how do we make that work? And in order for it to work, the system has to be super configurable. Rules must be flexible, and qualifiers and conditions must be very expansive. In recent systems, we found that any field that you have in the system can be used for any of these rules or qualifiers or conditions or whatever term you're used to in order to figure things out. The other thing that's important is they've often got lots of user-defined fields, UDFs. And you need to be able to make sure that rules and such can be written off of those. So, if you want only left-handers to get shift differential pay, as long as you use your UDFs correctly, you can configure this through the rule engine. It also applies when it only applies to one location, one union, one group of 10 employees, a special grandfathered group. These SaaS systems that we've seen have really done a great job of making sure that you can configure these rules to do so. Where you would have needed a custom rule in the old model, you can simply do that through configuration now. I touched on this before. This being said, there are always times where a client needs something strange. To be honest, when this happens and you need this, a lot of it depends on cloud. The bigger the company, the more likely you can talk to the SaaS provider and get something in your system. It obviously helps if other companies have that same issue. In a true SaaS world, no matter how strange the item that's added, it gets rolled into a product. So we have seen systems where we look at a particular rule and say, why did you include this rule in the general release? And the answer was a really large customer wanted it, and that's the reality of it. The next slide I have here has to do with configuration. you know, there are different arguments on both of these things, and there are degrees of discomfort that, you know, and I have on both sides of this. In a lot of ways, you know, we've come full circle. I remember working on old DOS-based systems, and the only way that we did configure was in a production system. And, you know, I'm sure some of you out there remember, actually, whenever you made changes, you always tested it on yourself or the people in your group first, because if something went wrong, you wanted to make sure that, you know, nobody else could find out. And, you know, as far as running payroll, if somebody's paycheck was going to be wrong, you wanted it to be yours because you knew how to fix it.
Yeah, you test yourself, your team, and your boss.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And his boss's boss.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, in a perfect world, we'd have an environment for everything. You know, you got your config, your test, your QA, your production environments. And, you know, we still see that in a lot of SaaS systems. However, you know, the things we have listed here about configuring production, there's intermediate, there's no migration required. You know, it helps if you have a disciplined and experienced team, and it's just less overall effort. You know, there's risk in migration as well, so, you know, it's just managing your risk. You know, obviously having a test system can lower your overall risk, and it makes things, you know, more secure. I think as a general statement, we've seen some hybrid approaches. We've really done it across the board. I think it costs a little bit more to have a test system, and where it's appropriate, we still recommend doing it. But I just kind of want to get out there letting everybody know that we're seeing a lot more of configuration and things happening in production systems.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're seeing is typically we will have a system during implementation, and we'll configure within that system, and that very system is the one that eventually becomes the production system. So, you know, we do have a little bit more attention to, you know, making sure you don't put bad squirrely data or do something weird in the system. You know, you might do that with a test system to try it out or to test it. And I think maybe listening to us, you might get the feeling that this one was a little bit tough for us as well. But it has worked out, I think, very well. We've had some great successes in terms of being able to configure in production, and really no great disasters.
I think that this slide's pretty self-explanatory, but I'll run through it quickly. It's very important, you know, for backups. Be sure to have a mechanism in place to get a copy of your data. Determine how frequently the backups will be possible. Determine that frequency meets your needs, and ensure to back up your configuration as well as your data. You know, one thing I always stress to clients is just because this is SaaS doesn't mean you shouldn't know what's happening on and have input. This is one of those times, even when you're not hosting the data, it's still yours. You need to be able to access it when necessary. You know, a lot of times you're not going to have SQL access to this data, and that's going to be a bit unnerving for a lot of you. Just, you know, we've seen that from experience. You don't want the backup plan to just fall to default settings and you know, have the vendor just handle it for you. You want to be proactive here. You want to understand how often they're backing up the data, how to get copies of, you know, the data that's not just traditional reporting when needed, and if you need dumps of those data, how you're going to be able to get it. So it's important to work with the vendor and not just accept that, hey, they're handling it and we'll be okay if we need it.
Yeah, but definitely work with the vendor and establish a regular frequency, whatever works for you, in terms of getting it back up and storing it within your own domain, within your own corporate firewalls.
So I know this is a top 10 list, but I always love the new Spinal Tap, and when you can turn it up to 11, we always figure you should do so. So slide number 11 talks a little bit about the life cycle. The first thing we have here is periodic releases. You know, the timing is dictated by the vendor. You still have some say when it comes to providers. Oftentimes what will happen is they'll release the new functionality but not turn it on in the system until you say okay. But, you know, in reality, especially in some of these newer systems, just releasing it into the software can, you know, mess things up. As far as upgrades, you know, as a general statement, they're becoming a thing of the past. These upgrades, there's really no cost and no project to do so. You know, you'll hear when you're researching it's a lot the abbreviation PEPM, which is per employee per month. And how you paying for these upgrades are generally included inside of it. Obviously every vendor can be different. But I think we all know that upgrades can be a big headache, and not having to concern yourself with those things is a very nice thing.
I think one of the vendor strategies that's working very well here in terms of upgrade are smaller chunks much more frequently, and you will get into kind of a regular rhythm of when these things come along, and there won't be once every 2 years your business grinds to a halt where you have to execute an upgrade. So we're seeing much better client satisfaction out of this model.
I like to compare SaaS it's kind of like leasing a car. You keep it for a monthly fee until you turn it in. The thing is, we found in today's world, technology is moving so fast. You can't afford to be on the old technology. You can't be on an old DOS-based system 9 years after Windows came out. You need to stay, on top of these things a lot more. Things are integrating with other systems. People are expecting much faster times, and they're expecting much better functionality. If you want to switch to another provider under the SaaS model, we found it's a lot easier. It's kind of like going from a Chevy to a Ford. You can do it a lot quicker if you choose to do that. It's nice not to be locked into something for, how many times have I heard we're so invested in, whatever company you want to insert there that there's no way we're going to change it forever. Well, if you're unhappy with where you are, obviously there's contractual issues, but you do have the ability to shop around and look at new providers a lot easier.
Vendor lock-in is becoming a thing of the past.
We've got a couple more slides, and I know we're running out of time, that I'm going to run through real quick. This slide is titled What Works? The speed to cost, deploy, and implement. It's a shared responsibility. It's very often it's a fixed cost. As far as vendor service, there's a built-in incentive for vendors to provide levels of service. It's easier for people to leave, and you've really got to keep a good reputation to get new customers as well as retain them. The fees are a simple model. Most of them operate in a PEPM model like we talked about before. As far as innovation, vendors tend to be the technical leaders. Foster a culture of innovation internal to vendors and reaching out to customers. It's very important. As far as security, we've seen that vendors are a lot more proactive than one company's IT department. That may not be the case always with a very large client, but with most companies out there, you're really going to get the benefit of their research and expertise. It's nice to have the latest and greatest. One thing that we do want to point out here is scalability, and I think sometimes when people think SaaS, they always assume smaller companies. One thing that we found is that these SaaS products are very scalable, and that it's really become a non-issue no matter how big you are. You have to understand that while you might be a small company on SaaS, there are several small companies sitting right next to you working on the same boxes. It's no different than if you have a large company and you're using that whole box or several boxes to yourself. It still scales very well, and we have found performance has been great. The only concern there would be, the scalability of mobile infrastructure and the internet in general.
And again, before we move off of mobile, just like to throw a question for contemplation out to the audience. What will it take you to implement mobile functionality on your current platform? For people on SaaS vendors, it's basically just enabling the function and training the users. So no infrastructure changes required at all.
The last slide we have here is called SaaS Do Your Homework. We're talking about SaaS to you, and we are big proponents of the model, but it's not a slam dunk. There are several times where it may not be the best solution for you. There are times where on-premise and hosted models can make a lot more sense. SaaS adopters are advised to pay extra attention to some of these areas. Evaluate the vendor roadmap and enhancement history. Has the vendor traditionally met their targets? Are there planned enhancements pertinent to your requirements? What has the vendor customers experienced when upgraded? You want to look at the vendor management teams. you know, who is this company? Where did they come from before? Are they industry leaders? You know, understanding those things will help you a lot. Always request detailed documentation around security, and here we you know, listed a couple of different ones to look at. And finally, you want to evaluate the integration capabilities closely. You know what systems you need to integrate with, and you really want to be able to see how those are going to integrate. Well, thank you very much for joining our presentation. If you have any questions, we can take them now.
Yeah, this presentation will be archived out on the hr.com website, so if you have somebody that you'd like to pass this along to, feel free. I'm sure Amy will probably provide some details. I anticipate you would get possibly an email afterward. This is our email addresses, phone numbers, and our Twitter account. So feel free to love you to follow us on Twitter. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask now. Or that's our contact information. Jot it down, and feel free to reach out to us after the presentation if you'd like to discuss any of this further. So we'll open up the line for questions now. James, I think you explained it so well, nobody has any questions. We'll wait a couple more minutes. Well, like I said, feel free to jot down our contact information and reach out to us later if you would like. But thank you again for attending the presentation, and hopefully you found it useful. Please do fill out the survey afterward and give us your candid comments and feedback. That way we can hopefully improve either what we present or how we present. So anyway, have a great day, everyone.